It had rained earlier that morning, leaving the cemetery soil damp and dark, like the grief hanging over everyone's heads. Heavy clouds loomed low, smothering the sky in a silvery grey blanket. The wind whispered through the trees, brushing against black coats and fluttering the corner of the American flag draped over the casket. It was a quiet, almost reverent breeze, until it wasn't. A sudden growl broke through the stillness. All heads turned as the sharp, guttural sound came from beside the casket. Max, the German shepherd, was standing rigidly, fur bristling, ears perked, eyes locked. His handler, the late Officer Jordan Reed, lay within the flag-wrapped coffin. But Max wasn't looking at the casket. He was staring at someone else. Father. Camden. The priest had just begun reciting the final rites when Max's low growl froze his voice mid-sentence. His fingers tightened subtly on the prayer book, the knuckles whitening, but his eyes didn't dare meet the dog's. Instead, he looked toward the widow and offered a forced smile. Though his jaw tensed with a strain he couldn't quite hide, Max didn't blink. He didn't bark. Not yet. He simply stared. Like a soldier who had spotted something others hadn't. The crowd had stilled. A few whispers passed like gusts between gravestones. Someone shifted uncomfortably behind the line of uniformed officers. A little girl clutched her mother's hand, eyes flicking between the still casket and the growling dog. Officer Jordan had been a respected man in the force, decorated, loved, the kind of officer who never asked others to do what he wouldn't. Everyone in town knew Max and Jordan as inseparable, partners not just in duty, but in something deeper. When Jordan died suddenly in his sleep, the news had crushed the department. A cardiac arrest, they said. Peaceful. But Max's reaction now, it wasn't peaceful, it wasn't mourning, it was warning. "Shh, Max," whispered a young officer kneeling near the leash. He placed a calming hand on the dog's back, but Max didn't budge. His body remained taut, every muscle coiled. The dog's growl intensified into a short, sharp bark that made the priest visibly flinch. The priest looked up again, clearing his throat. We gather here to honor the memory of Officer Reed," he said, his voice strained and thinner now. "A brave man, a loving husband," and Max barked again, louder this time. Father Camden froze, eyes now flickering just briefly toward the dog. His lips tightened, and then he lowered his head toward the Bible, pretending to continue. Reading, though his hands trembled faintly with each turn of the page, the air felt colder. People exchanged glances, uncertain. Some assumed the dog was simply distressed by grief. Others, especially those who had worked closely with Officer Reed, looked less sure. They had seen that look in Max's eyes before, on raids, when danger was near, when someone was lying. Max didn't bark out of confusion. He barked when something was wrong. 2 rows behind the widow, a retired lieutenant named Burke adjusted his jacket, narrowing his eyes at the priest. He had known Camden long before he'd joined the cloth. Before the collar. Before the quiet. Max stepped forward slightly, dragging the leash just an inch. His eyes never left Camden. Camden took a breath, lowering the Bible. Perhaps we should take a moment of silent prayer," he offered quickly. But silence had already taken hold, and not the peaceful kind. It was the kind that follows, a sudden noise in a dark room, a silence where people listen with their entire bodies, the kind of silence that came not from reverence but anticipation. A gust of wind swept across the hill, lifting leaves and tugging at black veils. Somewhere in the trees above, a crow called out, sharp and metallic. Max didn't react to that, only to the man in the robe. Camden looked up again. This time their eyes met. Max barked, deep and raw. The priest's throat bobbed once in a hard swallow. He looked to the funeral director, then to the officers standing beside the casket, but no one moved. The leash inched forward again. The young officer holding Max looked confused but didn't stop him. It was as if the dog had earned the right to be heard. Camden stepped back. Just one step. Small, almost natural, but not to Max. The growl came again, low and long and cold. From the back of the crowd, Burke muttered under his breath. "That dog knows something." A child in the front row whispered to her mother, "Why is he barking at the priest?" The mother didn't answer. Camden turned a page in his book with slow, deliberate care, but it was clear his hands were sweating. One trembled slightly. Max didn't need a reason to bark. He needed the truth. And everyone standing at that hill by that coffin, with the scent of wet grass and regret in the air, everyone now felt it. Something wasn't right, and the only one willing to speak it out loud couldn't speak at all. Whispers spread like smoke through the crowd, quiet at first, then layered, overlapping, impossible to trace. The sound of Max's growling hadn't just broken the silence, it had fractured the illusion of control. The leash in the young officer's hand trembled as Max surged again. Half a step forward, shoulders squared, eyes locked like a trained marksman on the priest who had just finished a prayer without meeting anyone's eyes. Father Camden shifted, stepping sideways as if to realign himself with the casket. But the way he moved didn't sit right with many. It wasn't grief or reverence, it was caution, fear even. His eyes flicked around the cemetery, gauging the faces, some confused, others beginning to harden with suspicion. The breeze picked up again, this time colder, like something sacred had turned sour in the air. The mayor leaned toward Chief Lawson, whispering behind a raised hand. "Is the dog supposed to act like this?" Chief Lawson gave a slow shake of his head. "No, not at all." Max let out a sharp bark, twice, then fell back into that frozen stillness, tail low, ears forward. The officer holding the leash leaned down again, whispering to him like a child trying to calm a frightened animal. But Max wasn't afraid. He was alert, his breathing steady. Muscles locked. He knew what he was doing. A second bark echoed, sharp enough that someone in the back actually flinched. The priest jolted slightly, pretending to adjust his robe as he took a step back from the casket. His eyes darted toward Max, then back down, and for a moment, just a flicker. His lips moved, but no words came out. "You all right, Father?" Chief Lawson asked aloud, his voice cutting through the tension like a blade. Camden forced a breath, lifting his chin. "Yes, of course." But his smile didn't match the pallor in his face. Just startled. Poor thing must be confused. "Max isn't confused," muttered someone near the front. It was Burke. The old lieutenant crossed his arms over. His chest, eyes narrowed, voice low but deliberate. "That dog's trained to read people. Been by Jordan's side longer than any of us. He doesn't bark unless he has a reason." People turned. A wave of unease rippled through the mourners. Camden tried to regain his composure, raising the Bible again. Let's continue." But Max wasn't done. As soon as the priest turned toward the podium again, Max's growl started up, longer this time. A low, vibrating warning that carried weight. His paws dug into the earth. His gaze didn't shift an inch. The leash tugged against the young officer's hand. The boy was barely 22 and clearly torn between protocol and instinct. "Should I pull him back?" he whispered to Chief Lawson. But the chief didn't answer, because deep down even he wasn't sure anymore. Max let out a guttural snarl, short, deliberate, and Camden's hand slipped. The Bible hit the ground with a muted thud, pages fluttering like startled birds. The priest bent quickly to retrieve it, but his hands weren't steady. He fumbled with the edges, breathing quicker now, beads of sweat forming along his temple. Despite the chilly wind, someone in the third row took a step back. Another clutched their coat tighter. It wasn't just Max anymore. The air itself felt loaded. Burke stepped forward, not loudly, but with the slow certainty of a man who had spent his life in law enforcement. "What is it, boy?" he said, voice firm as he approached Max. "What are you trying to tell us?" Max barked again, short, focused once, and then he sat, still staring directly at Camden. A silence fell that felt impossibly loud, the kind where you could hear breathing, heartbeats, fabric shifting. The priest straightened up, brushing invisible dirt from his sleeves. His mouth opened, then closed. He began, but no words followed. The chief cleared his throat and took a single step forward. "Father Camden, is there anything we should know?" Camden stared at him, frozen. For a moment he looked like he might collapse, but then he blinked fast, recovering. "What on earth are you implying?" he said with strained dignity. "It's a funeral, not an interrogation." "I'm not implying anything," the chief replied evenly. "But I've never seen that dog react to anyone like this. Ever." Camden's voice snapped louder than expected. "It's just grief. Animals sense death differently. You can't honestly think—" "Maybe," Burke cut in, stepping beside it. the chief. Or maybe he smells something else. Max stood again. The wind stilled. The trees didn't move. A bird on a branch above them didn't flap. Even the clouds seemed to hang heavier over the cemetery. The priest opened his mouth again, and this time the tremble in his voice was impossible to hide. This is ridiculous, but it wasn't. But it wasn't. People were watching him now, not with sympathy but suspicion. The same man who had given sermons on truth and light was now visibly unraveling under the focused gaze of a dog who wouldn't look away. The widow stepped forward, her face pale, her voice a whisper. "Why is Max acting like this, Father? Why, just at you?" Camden swallowed hard. I don't know. But Max did, and so did everyone else. Something was wrong, and they were just starting to feel the weight of it. From the back of the crowd, a figure shifted, a man standing under the shade of a crooked willow, arms crossed over a dark jacket that had seen better days. His presence hadn't meant much to anyone when the funeral began, but now as silence deepened and eyes turned from the dog to the priest, his steps forward carried weight. His name was Aidan Shaw. He wasn't from this town. Not anymore. He had served with Officer Jordan Reed years ago in a precinct 3 counties over. After a mission went sideways and Jordan transferred back to his hometown, Aidan vanished from their lives like smoke in the wind. No one had heard from him in nearly a decade. But Max had. The moment Aidan stepped past the rows of mourners, Max's body shifted, tail swishing once, ears twitching toward him. The German shepherd gave a soft, almost reluctant huff, as if recognizing an old ally but not daring to break his vigil. Aidan didn't say a word. He crouched beside Max slowly, cautiously, his eyes locked with the dog's. His movements were deliberate, nothing sharp, nothing sudden, just presence, connection. "Hey, soldier," Aidan murmured. "I see you haven't lost your instincts." Max tilted his head slightly, then returned his stare to the priest. That was answer enough. Aidan stood, brushing his hands on his pants, and looked toward the casket, then back to the priest. His eyes, once hazel, looked stormy under the thick grey clouds. He wasn't dressed like the rest, no uniform, no badge, but he carried himself like someone who had once worn both. "Something's off," he said aloud. The crowd parted a little to make room. Chief Lawson's gaze narrowed. "You're Aidan." "Sure, aren't you?" Aidan nodded once. "Jordan was my partner. I got in this morning when I heard, didn't want to make a scene." His jaw tightened. "But I didn't expect the dog to beat me to it." Camden folded his arms. "Is this where everyone starts playing detective? This is sacred ground." Burke crossed his arms again. "So's the truth." Aidan looked down at Max. "How long's he been acting like this?" "Since the start of the service," the young officer said. Soon as Camden took the pulpit. Aidan muttered. He stepped a few feet forward toward the coffin. Not too close, just enough to watch Max's reaction. The dog didn't flinch, but when Aidan turned to face the priest, Max barked once, then resumed his glare. "He's warning me," Aidan said, "telling me where the problem is." "I beg your pardon," Camden snapped. "That animal is distressed. You're interpreting growls like scripture." "Maybe," Aidan said, his tone calm, "but I worked a K9 before. Jordan and I trained with Max when he was a pup. That dog's not barking at the wind. He's locking on to something, or someone." He turned toward Camden again, voice quieter now, but sharper. "What did you do, Father?" Gasps fluttered like moths through the gathering. Several people instinctively looked at one another, wide-eyed, lips parted. "I did nothing," Camden said, voice raised. "I found Jordan myself, in his bed. I called it in, waited for the paramedics. I did my duty." "Did you now?" Aidan's brow furrowed. "Because Jordan was healthy, strong, just past his yearly physical. You think we wouldn't check that?" Camden's nostrils flared. "You're accusing a priest of what?" "Murder. Is that what this circus has come to?" Aidan took a deep breath and kept his voice level. "I'm saying there's a reason that dog won't stop. He knows, maybe not how or why, but he knows something's not right." He took another step forward. "And so do I." Camden chuckled bitterly. "You've been in town all of, what, 10 minutes? And suddenly you're some truth prophet because the mutt growled at me. Max barked again, short, loud, echoing. Camden flinched. He's not a mutt, Aiden said, his voice turning colder. He's the last thing Jordan trusted. That struck deep. The words landed like a stone on still water. A few in the front. Rows lowered their heads. Others stared at the priest now with furrowed brows and uncertain hearts. Lawson stepped up beside Aiden. You said you found Jordan? I did. Alone? Camden hesitated, just for a second, then nodded. Yes. Burke stepped beside them now, arms crossed. You say you were there when Jordan died, but the medics said rigor had already set in by the time they arrived, which means you found him a lot later than you claimed. The priest said nothing. Aiden turned to Max. You were there too, weren't you? Max gave a soft grunt, as if understanding. The wind returned, harsher now. It swept through the cemetery and tousled the edges of Camden's robe. From the back of the crowd, someone whispered, "Something happened in that house." Aiden's eyes never left the priest. You said you waited for help, but there's no 911 call from you on record. Want to explain that? Camden's hands, tight at his sides, curled into fists. I used Jordan's phone. His battery must have died. You're lying, Aiden said plainly. Camden's voice cracked. You can't prove, but Max can, Aiden said softly, and I'm going to follow him wherever he leads, even if that means tearing through every file, every church wall, and every secret you buried. The silence that followed was different now, heavier, decisive. A shift had occurred. Max sat tall, resolute. His gaze never wavered. The dog had spoken. Now Aiden would listen. The funeral had ended in murmurs. No one clapped, no one consoled. They simply scattered, like frightened birds sensing a storm not far behind. Max remained rooted in place, watching the priest retreat with quiet, calculated steps, avoiding every eye that fell on him. Father Camden hadn't even stayed to offer condolences to the widow. Aiden lingered. He stood beside Max until the crowd disappeared beyond the cemetery gates. The air still hadn't warmed. It clung to the trees like frost that refused to melt. You want me to follow you, don't you? Aiden muttered. Max responded not with a bark, but by walking, deliberately, toward the far corner of the cemetery. Aiden followed. The dog led him through a patch of overgrown brush near the older graves, the ones with cracked headstones and moss-eaten dates. At the edge, just before the tree line, Max stopped and sniffed a weathered bench. Then he pawed at the base. What is it? Aiden crouched, brushing aside dried leaves. There, beneath the bench, wrapped in a plastic bag, shielded from weather, was a small black notebook. He looked at Max. Did you hide this? Max gave a quiet huff, sat back down and waited. Aiden pulled out the notebook and opened the cover. Jordan's handwriting. His heart clenched. The pages were dated, short entries, some mundane, others cryptic. But it didn't take long before Aiden found the first unsettling line. Camden's been at the house again. Says he's helping with the grieving process. But I don't trust him. Max doesn't either. Aiden flipped further. Max growled at him last night. That never happens. Something about Camden feels off. Then another. Camden asked me again about my service weapon. He says he wants it for a display at the Church Hall Memorial. I said no, he didn't like that. Aiden swallowed, his fingers tightening around the page. And then the most damning one. Found Camden in my office tonight. Said he was looking for a prayer book. Nothing was missing except the envelope, the one with the bank records. A chill ran down Aiden's spine. He glanced at Max. The shepherd's eyes were fixed on him, but behind them was something ancient, trust and urgency. Let's go, Aiden whispered. The sun dipped behind the tree line as they left the cemetery. The world turned grey again, not with rain, but with tension. Back at Jordan's house, everything was still covered in silence. The department hadn't cleared out his belongings yet. His badge still sat in its case by the front door. The couch still held the faint imprint of where he used to sit, and Max, without hesitation, moved toward the study. Aiden followed close, behind. The desk was locked. That was new. He reached into the back of a drawer where Jordan always kept a spare key, popped the lock, and pulled it open. Inside, beneath a stack of folders, was a manila envelope. Inside that, photocopies of church financials, large withdrawals, strange account names, transfers to Camden's personal non-profit. Aidan read line after line. Jordan had been tracking it, quietly, carefully, documenting patterns. There were printouts of check images, digital transfers, even a flash drive taped to the back of the folder. "You knew," Aidan whispered. "You knew something was going on." Max whined softly beside him, tail brushing the carpet. Then he stood and moved to the window, nose against the glass, ears upright. Aidan followed his line of sight. Across the street, barely visible in the dim light, a shadow moved behind the rectory window. Camden's house. Max growled low. "He's watching us," Aidan muttered. But they had enough. He gathered the files, tucked the flash drive into his coat pocket, and locked the study behind him. Later that night, Aidan sat in Jordan's kitchen with Max curled beside him, notebook in one hand, flash drive in the other. He had plugged it into his laptop and scrolled through folders Jordan had named plainly: Sunday reports, staff deductions, youth fund, discrepancy. But one folder was locked. Password protected. Aidan stared at it. He looked down at the notebook again, flipped to the final entry Jordan had written, scrawled hastily and uneven. "If anything happens to me, check MAX." He always knew first. Aidan typed the letters into the prompt. Max, the folder opened. Inside were images. Dozens. One in particular made Aidan stop breathing. It was a photo of Camden, inside the church office, placing what looked like white powder into a mug. The mug had Jordan's name printed on the side. Another image showed Camden retrieving an envelope from Jordan's safe. A third showed him burning papers in the rectory fireplace. Aidan closed the laptop slowly. His blood ran hot with a cold kind of rage. Jordan hadn't just suspected Camden. He'd been documenting a crime quietly, methodically, until the priest got too close. Aidan looked at Max. The dog's eyes held still. "You saw it happen, didn't you?" Aidan said. "You were in the house that night," Max whined again, then stood and walked to the front door, tail low, body alert. He wanted to move. He wanted to finish what they'd started. Aidan reached for his coat, tucking the flash drive into an inside pocket and slipping the notebook under his arm. "I'm not letting him get away with this," Max barked once, sharp and focused, and they stepped out into the night, together. They had truth, they had proof, and before sunrise, the whole town would know what Father Camden had done. Rain hovered in the sea. Air like a breath never exhaled. The funeral had long ended, yet the chapel steps buzzed with quiet unrest. Officer Danvers' portrait, draped in black satin, now stood solemn under the grey sky as townsfolk lingered with murmurs that no longer felt like mourning. They were waiting for something unspoken, something unresolved. And it was about to erupt. Detective Clara Knox walked forward, the weight of everything she'd uncovered pressing into her bones like steel. At her side padded Coda, the canine whose silent loyalty had sparked the unraveling of truth. The German shepherd's fur was damp, his eyes burning with an intensity that now everyone noticed. No barking this time, no growls, just unwavering focus, fixed. Again on the man in the collar, Father Ellis. He stood near the chapel's entrance, hands clasped in front of him, fingers twitching in prayer that no one asked for. His eyes darted, once to the ground, then to Clara, then back to the dog. The facade of calm had cracked. He felt it. The shift. The center would not hold. Clara stopped in the gravel path, facing the crowd, then turned slowly toward Ellis. "Know what happened?" she said, voice just loud enough to cut through the air. The wind caught her coat, flipping it like a curtain revealing a storm. People turned, first in confusion, then silence. Ellis laughed gently, nervously. "Detective Knox, this is sacred ground. Maybe now isn't the time," Coda growled. Low, guttural, primal. It was not a sound of warning, it was a verdict. "Then when is the time, Father?" Clara's voice was cold but steady. "Was it sacred when you stole from Officer Danvers? When you used your collar to cover your tracks? When you tried to frame him before his body was cold?" A hush fell like snowfall. Heads turned, gasped breaths. No one moved. Ellis backed a step, then tried to recover. This woman is clearly disturbed. Grief does strange things. That animal is clearly unstable. He's trained to detect danger, trained to detect guilt, and he led me straight to your house, Clara said, reaching into her coat pocket. And what we found? A thumb drive hidden in your altar, financial ledgers, emails, threats to Danvers. You were extorting him, and when he tried to go public, you have no proof, Ellis snapped, voice rising an octave. Clara stepped closer. We have everything, including a recording. Danvers recorded your last conversation. You threatened to expose his late wife's sealed court records unless he kept quiet about your laundering. Ellis's lips trembled, his nostrils flared, and for a moment he looked like a cornered wolf. A beat passed. Then the priest broke. He was going to ruin me, he shouted, voice no longer pious, no longer contained. Do you know what the truth would have done? What it would have meant for this parish, for me? Gasps rippled through the crowd. A woman in the front row dropped her prayer book. A man stepped protectively in front of his child. Ellis's eyes widened, suddenly aware of what he'd done. No. Wait, I didn't kill him. I only wanted him silenced. Just enough pressure. A crack of thunder rolled like a gavel from the heavens. Clara nodded slowly. That pressure led to his car. Being sabotaged. Brake line, same night he called you and told you he was done being blackmailed. Ellis began to step back toward the church doors, but Coda moved. With a powerful lunge, the dog cut off the priest's retreat, teeth bared, stance rigid, not to attack, but to block, to expose, to say, here he is. The man behind the collar, the... Doors of the church opened behind Ellis, and from them someone stepped out, an older woman walking slowly, wrapped in a shawl. But it wasn't just anyone. It was Marla Danvers, Officer Danvers' mother. Everyone thought she hadn't left her home in weeks. But here she was, eyes burning, holding in her hand an envelope, aged, crumpled, familiar. She raised her voice, trembling but clear. My son wrote this letter the night before he died. He left it in my mailbox in case something ever happened to him. I was too afraid to open it until now. The envelope opened. Her voice cracked as she read. If you're reading this, I'm gone. I need you to know it wasn't an accident. It wasn't suicide. Father Ellis has been blackmailing me for months. He found out about Lisa's custody trial and threatened to destroy everything unless I kept quiet about the church's finances. But I can't anymore. He's laundering money from community donations. I've traced it. He's using the veterans charity to move the cash. If anything happens to me, he's the reason. No one breathed. Ellis turned pale, stumbling. You can't prove... But Clara raised her hand, signaling to two uniformed officers behind the crowd. We can, and we will. You're under arrest. As the handcuffs clicked shut, Ellis snarled, You think this dog makes you righteous? He's just an animal. But Clara looked at Coda and then back at the fallen priest. No, he's better than you. He knew what you were the moment he saw you. Coda stepped closer, locking eyes with Ellis once more. No bark, no growl. Just a long, cold stare that said everything without a single word. And then, from the back of the crowd, a shout. Wait, there's someone else. All heads turned. It was Officer Jensen, Danvers' former partner, pale-faced, breathless. Ellis wasn't alone. He had help. Someone in the department, someone who fed him intel. Clara turned sharply. Who? But before Jensen could... Answer, a loud crack echoed. Gunfire from the chapel roof. Chaos erupted. Screams scattered through the crowd as people ducked. Clara tackled Marla Danvers to the ground. Officers drew weapons. Coda leapt over the railing and charged toward the side of the building. A man in a black hoodie bolted from the roof's side ladder. A chase began. Clara ran. Coda ran faster, and within seconds, the shepherd caught him. Pinned the assailant to the gravel, snarling, until officers pulled the weapon away. The man screamed, face scraped, knees bloodied. Underneath the hood, Officer Redman. Internal Affairs. Clara's stomach turned. She had suspected internal corruption, but not him. Redman wept as they cuffed him. I had no choice. Ellis said he'd frame me too. I didn't kill Danvers. I just passed the files. Just the files. But it was too late. The truth was out, and it was bloodier than anyone expected. The police tape fluttered like yellow ghosts in the rising morning wind. It had been a long night. Aidan sat alone on the steps of the old chapel, the eastern sky bleeding, orange behind him. His coat hung open, shoulders slumped in exhaustion. In one hand he held a paper cup of burnt coffee. In the other, Jordan's notebook, its edges bent, the pages stiff from weather and time. Coda, no longer just a K9 but something else entirely, lay beside him. His muzzle rested against Aidan's boot, chest rising and falling with the rhythm of hard-earned sleep. But even asleep, his ears twitched at every footstep in the gravel. The instincts never really rested. The truth was out. Father Ellis and Officer Redman had both been taken into custody, their crimes laid bare in statements, evidence logs, and that folder labeled MAX. The flash drive had held enough to burn a cathedral's worth of reputations, embezzlement, coercion, poisoning. It had all spiraled from a man's desperate need to protect the empire he had built behind the pulpit. Jordan's death had not been a tragedy. It had been a cover-up. Clara stepped out of the chapel doors and approached, arms folded tightly over her chest. Her boots crunched over the gravel, stopping a few feet away. "He's really gone," she said, voice hoarse. And he knew it was coming. Aidan didn't look up. "Yeah. He still tried to fight it," she added. "Tried to document everything. But he didn't have time." "No," Aidan replied. "But Max did." She looked down at the dog, then crouched and gently ran a hand over his head. "He never gave up, did he?" Not for a second. The silence between them was heavy but no longer suffocating. It was reverent, final. "The mayor's called for a press conference," Clara said after a moment. "Public apology, full investigation into the charity funds, a complete audit. Redman's going to flip, give up names. This wasn't just a town secret." "Never is," Aidan said, standing. Clara rose with him. "What will you do now?" Aidan looked toward the horizon. The chapel bell hadn't rung that morning. The air felt different, like something had been released. "I think I'll stay," he said. "Just a while. Finish what Jordan started. Clean the rot from the inside." She nodded. "We could use someone like you." A movement behind them caught their attention. Marla Danvers stood in her black shawl, holding a photo frame to her chest. She looked older than yesterday. Lighter, too. As if grief, when shared fully, made space for something gentler. She walked toward them, slow but steady, stopping before Max. "Thank you," she whispered. Max lifted his head and looked up at her. "I always knew you were the best part of him," she added, voice cracking. The dog reached forward and nudged her wrist with his nose. Soft, deliberate. Tears fell silently down her cheeks. She dropped to her knees and wrapped her arms around him, sobbing not with violence but relief. Aidan looked away. Let her have this moment, let her mourn finally, without the weight of lies. Later that afternoon, Aidan unlocked the side door to Jordan's home with a key that still bore the worn JR. Initials. The house smelled faintly of cedar, old cologne, and memories too thick to name. Max entered first, sniffing the edges of the floorboards, the couch, the empty food dish still in the corner. Everything here had waited. Aidan placed the notebook on the kitchen table, beside the badge case that had once belonged to a man the town now called a hero. But it hadn't been the badge that made him one. It had been the quiet courage, the silent warnings, the willingness to trust a dog when no one else would. He opened the fridge. It was mostly empty. Then the cupboard. Dusty cereal, expired cans. Nothing worth keeping. His hand hesitated on one drawer, then pulled it open. Inside, under a sheaf of old receipts, was a small velvet box. Curious, Aidan opened it. A ring, not an engagement ring, a silver band, inscribed with something on the D. Inside, to the one who watches when no one else can. He stared at it for a long time. Later, he placed it in Max's collar, securing it with the tiny loop next to the ID tag. "You earned that," he said softly. Evening came again. The town was quieter now. No sirens, no press, just streetlights, flickering on one by one, like stars remembering how to shine. Aidan sat on the porch of Jordan's home, feet up on the rail. Max lay beside him, chin resting on the wooden planks. "I keep thinking about what he wrote," Aiden said aloud. "How he said you always knew first. He wasn't wrong." Max's tail thumped once. "You're not just a dog, you know that." "Here's in proof." Max lifted his head and looked at him. Proof that some instincts never lie, that justice doesn't always come in a courtroom or a headline. A long pause followed. Then Aiden smiled, slow, sad, but real. "I think Jordan would have liked this ending." Max didn't move, just watched him quietly. Always watching. The next morning, the whole town gathered outside City Hall. A podium had been set. Flags raised. The mayor stood with trembling hands and a voice that faltered as he offered an official apology to the Danvers family and the police department, but no one listened to him. They watched Coda, now wearing a freshly polished badge tag beside his silver ring. He stood beside Marla Danvers, tail still, posture perfect. The picture of solemn pride. When the mayor gestured toward the podium, inviting her to speak, she shook her head gently. Instead, she stepped aside, allowing Aiden to take the microphone. He cleared his throat. "I didn't grow up in this town," he began, "but I knew Jordan Danvers before he ever came back here. I knew him as a friend, as a brother in arms, as the kind of man who believed in the quiet, hard work of good people." He paused. "And I knew him as the kind of man who could trust a dog more than he trusted most humans. That trust saved lives, even after he was gone." He looked down at Max. "This isn't just about corruption. It's about loyalty, about faith, about the idea that even when someone's gone, they still leave a mark, they still guide us." He stepped away from the mic. No applause followed, but they didn't need it. The message had landed. That night, Clara joined Aiden and Max on the porch. 3 mugs of coffee, one for each, though Max's was filled with warm broth. Stars stretched across the sky. Crickets chirped. The air had finally softened. "You know," Clara said, sipping, "there's talk of naming the community center after Jordan." Aiden raised his cup. "He'd hate that," she laughed. "Yeah, he would." A pause. "You going to adopt him?" she asked, nodding to Max. "He adopted me," Aiden replied. Max barked softly once, and then they sat in silence. 3 silhouettes, 1 porch, 1 shared truth, and somewhere, not far from them, the wind carried the last remnants of a lie away, into the trees. The case was closed, but the story would live forever, forever.